Did you even ask the owner of this house for permission? The question left my mouth with a calm I hadn't expected. I had just opened the door to my condo, grocery bags still dangling from my arms, and there she was. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, standing right in the middle of my living room as if it were nothing. There were two enormous suitcases at her feet and an expression that mixed surprise with something worse. Annoyance. As if I were the intruder. As if my arrival had ruined her perfectly laid plans. She looked up at me, blinked twice, and then let out that uncomfortable little laugh she used whenever someone confronted her. It was a short, sharp laugh designed to make the other person feel ridiculous. But I didn't look away. I stood there on the threshold of my own home, holding the heavy bags filled with produce and canned goods, waiting for an answer she clearly hadn't prepared. "Hey, Ava. I didn't hear you come in." Her voice sounded light, almost musical, as if we were having a casual conversation about the weather, as if the suitcases didn't exist, as if it were completely normal for her to be in my condo on a Thursday afternoon without warning me. Without asking, without showing the slightest consideration for the fact that this was my space, my refuge, the only place in the world where I could still breathe without anyone demanding anything of me. I didn't move. I stayed right there in the doorway, feeling the weight of the bags beginning to leave red marks on my forearms. But I didn't drop them. Something inside me had hardened the exact moment I saw those suitcases. Something that had been soft, pliable, always ready to give in. For years, I had finally found a boundary. "I asked you a question, Chloe." My voice came out firmer this time. She tucked a strand of her perfectly styled hair behind her ear, that gesture she made when she needed to stall for time to think about what to say. Her eyes, painted with light shadows that matched her designer blouse, avoided mine for a second before she looked back at me with that small, condescending smile I despised so much. "Ava, please don't exaggerate. Dion and I only need to stay for a few days. They're doing renovations in our condo and the noise is unbearable. The crew starts at 6 a.m. and doesn't leave until 7 p.m. We can't sleep. We can't work. We can't live like this. We figured it wouldn't be a problem to come here. After all, you live alone and you have 2 bedrooms you don't even use." There it was. That one sentence that perfectly summed up what my family thought of me. You live alone and you have rooms you don't use. As if my life were an empty space waiting to be filled by the needs of others. As if the fact that no one was sleeping in the rooms next door automatically turned my home into a resource available to whoever needed it. As if my 68 years of existence didn't grant me the right to decide how, when, or with whom to share my space. I finally walked into the apartment and set the bags on the dining room table. The sound of the canned goods hitting the wood was louder than I'd expected. Chloe took a step back, barely perceptible, but I noticed it. Her body language had changed. She wasn't so relaxed anymore. The discomfort was starting to filter through the mask of security she always wore. I stood beside the table, not unpacking the groceries, not moving toward the kitchen as I normally would. My hands rested on the wooden surface, and I could feel my own pulse beating in my fingertips. It wasn't fear. It wasn't nerves. It was something different. It was the feeling of reaching a point of no return. "Does Dion know you're here?" The question was rhetorical. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it. I needed to confirm what I already suspected. That my son had allowed this, that he had been part of this plan from the start, that they had both decided together. That my consent wasn't necessary. Chloe let out a long dramatic sigh as if I were being unreasonably difficult. "Of course, he knows, Ava. It was his idea. Actually, he's finishing up some business at the office, and we'll be over later with the rest of our stuff. I thought he'd have called to tell you." He didn't call. No, he didn't call. And that silence, that absence of a simple phone call, told me everything I needed to know. My son, Dion, the child I'd raised alone after his father disappeared from our lives when he was only 7 years old. The same one I fed with the salary from my double shifts, cleaning offices and serving coffee. The same one who hugged me when he was little and said that when he grew up, he would take care of me forever. That very son now considered it perfectly acceptable to move into my house without consulting me, as if I were an extension of his convenience, a resource at his disposal. I walked toward the suitcases. I stood in front of them, staring as if they were alien objects dropped from another planet. They were expensive, those brands Chloe flaunted on social media. Shiny new, probably bought during one of those trips they took every couple of months while I was still using the same worn-out suitcase I'd bought 15 years ago at a liquidation sale. And you thought this was okay? Showing up at my house with your suitcases without asking if I was agreeable, without considering for even a moment that maybe I had plans, that maybe I value my privacy, that maybe I don't want people living here. Chloe crossed her arms over her chest. Her posture changed. She was no longer the casual, relaxed daughter-in-law. Now there was defensiveness in every line of her body. Ava, you're Dion's mother. We're family. I don't understand why you're making this so complicated. It's only for a few days, maybe a week. It's not like we're asking for something impossible. Besides, I thought you'd be happy to have company. You always say this place feels empty. Empty. The word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. Yes, I had once mentioned that the house felt silent after my sister Olivia moved out to live with her daughter last year. But there was an enormous difference between silence and empty. My house was silent because I chose it that way. Because after decades of noise, of demands, of being available to everyone but myself, I had finally found peace in the stillness. But Chloe had taken that casual confession and turned it into a justification. As if my moment of vulnerability gave her permission to invade my space. As if admitting I sometimes felt lonely was the same as begging someone to come fill every corner of my life without asking me first. Listen to me closely. My voice was low but firm. Chloe stopped moving. Something in my tone made her pay real attention for the first time since she'd arrived. This house can feel however it wants to feel to me. It can be silent or it can be full of noise. It can be empty or it can be complete. But what it will never ever be is available to anyone who decides to use it. And my permission. I am the owner of this house, Chloe. Not a convenient option when you two have a problem. She opened her mouth to reply, but at that moment we heard the sound of a key in the lock. The door opened and Dion, my son, walked in, carrying 2 more bags and wearing that carefree smile he used when he thought everything was under control. Mom, glad you're home. Chloe explained it to you, right? We'll only be here for a week, 2 at the most. You won't even notice we're here. Don's words floated in the air as if they were the most reasonable thing in the world. He set the bags on the floor next to the suitcases, dusted his hands on his pants, and looked at me with that expression I knew too well. It was the same look he had when he was 12 years old and came home late after playing basketball with his friends, expecting me not to get mad because he was just being a normal kid after all. Except Dion wasn't 12 anymore. He was 42, and I was no longer that young, exhausted mother who gave in to every smile because I was too tired to fight another battle. I stood by the dining room table, my hands still resting on the wood, watching him enter my condo as if it were his own territory, as if the last 40 years hadn't passed, as if continuing to be his mother meant I had automatically surrendered any expectation of respect or consideration. Dion approached and tried to give me a kiss on the cheek. I didn't move. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. I stayed exactly where I was, and he must have noticed something in my posture because he stopped halfway. A look of confusion briefly crossing his face before turning into a wider, more forced smile. What's wrong, Mom? Did you have a bad day? A bad day? As if my reaction were the result of a passing mood. As if the problem was that I'd had to wait too long in line at the bank or that traffic had been heavy. Not that my son and daughter-in-law had decided to move into my home without consulting me. Not that they had treated me as if my opinion were irrelevant. Not that they had assumed my life, my space, my peace were resources available for their convenience. I didn't have a bad day, Dion. I had an unpleasant surprise when I got home to find your wife moving in here without anyone asking me if I agreed. Dion chuckled, a genuine laugh, as if he just heard something funny. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture he made when he thought someone was overreacting, and shook his head. Mom, please don't be dramatic. I called you twice this morning and you didn't answer. I figured you were out and we could get settled before you got back. It's not that big of a deal. I looked over at Chloe, who was now standing next to the suitcases with her arms still crossed, watching the exchange with a mixture of discomfort and something that dangerously resembled satisfaction, as if my confrontation with Dion was proving something she already suspected, that I was difficult, that I was unreasonable, that I was the obstacle in a situation that should have been simple. You called twice, and when I didn't answer, you decided that was enough authorization to move into my house. We're not moving in, Mom. We're just staying for a few days. Dion moved toward the kitchen, opened the refrigerator casually, grabbed a bottle of water I'd bought that afternoon, and drank straight from it. That small gesture, so insignificant to any external observer, felt like a confirmation of everything I'd been thinking. He saw no difference between his space and mine. To him, my house was an extension of his. My refrigerator, my food, my privacy, it was all part of a shared territory where he had unlimited access. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control the pressure building in my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was something deeper, older. It was the accumulated weight of decades of being the person who always yielded, who always understood, who always put others' needs before her own. It was the weariness of having spent my entire adult life being useful, available, and convenient for everyone but myself. How many days is a few days, Dion? He shrugged, still drinking the water, not looking directly at me. A week? 2 at the most. The crew said they'd finish up fast. It's just until we can sleep in our own bedroom again without waking up to the sound of drills at 6 a.m. 2 weeks. 14 days of having 2 people in my space, using my bathroom, eating my food, interrupting my routine. 14 days of not being able to walk in my pajamas through my own living room if I woke up thirsty in the middle of the night. 14 days of having to consider other schedules before deciding if I could watch my favorite show or listen to my music. 14 days of giving up the peace I had worked so hard to build after years of noise and chaos. And you just assumed I'd be okay with that? Dion finally capped the water bottle and looked at me with something that tried to look like patience, but was really thinly veiled condescension. Mom, you're my mother. Of course, I assumed you'd be okay with it. What did you want us to do? Stay in a hotel and spend $150 a night when you have 2 empty bedrooms here? That doesn't make sense. $150 a night. There was the real truth. Naked and unadorned. It wasn't about needing me. It wasn't about wanting to spend time with me. It was about money, about economic convenience, about how using my apartment for free was more sensible than paying for their own comfort. And I, as always, was expected to understand, to be reasonable, to place their financial needs above my emotional tranquility. Chloe cleared her throat from her spot next to the suitcases. When she spoke, her voice had adopted that soft, conciliatory tone people use when they want to sound reasonable while manipulating a situation to their advantage. Ava, we really don't want to cause you any trouble. If it's a problem, we can help with expenses. I don't know, maybe $50 extra for utilities. We'll be using water and electricity. It's only fair we contribute. $50. As if the problem were the cost of utilities. As if I could put a price tag on my privacy, my routine, the quiet mornings where I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee and simply existed without having to be a mother-in-law, a hostess, or any other role others needed me to play. It's not about money, Chloe. My voice came out wearier than I intended. Dion approached again, this time putting a hand on my shoulder with that gesture he'd used 1,000 times when he wanted to soften me up. Then what is it about, Mom? Just tell me what's bothering you and we'll fix it. You want us to buy the groceries? Perfect. No problem. You want us to clean everything before we leave? We can do that too. You don't want us making noise in the mornings? We'll be silent as mice. Tell me what you need and we'll do it. What I needed was for them to have asked me first. What I needed was for them to have considered that maybe I had the right to say no. What I needed was for them to understand that being family didn't mean having automatic access to every aspect of my life without my consent. But how could I explain that without sounding like the selfish mother, the difficult mother-in-law, the unreasonable woman who refused to help her own family in a time of need? I gently moved Dion's hand from my shoulder, not with abruptness, but with enough firmness for him to know the gesture wasn't welcome right now. What I need, Dion, is for you to understand that this is my house, not a hotel, not a backup option, not a resource available every time you have an inconvenience. It's the place where I live, where I rest, where I have the right to decide who enters and who stays. But we're your family, Mom. His response was immediate, almost automatic, as if those 4 words were an irrefutable argument, as if the simple fact of sharing blood nullified any expectation of respect or consideration. And maybe for a long time I had believed that. Maybe for years I had accepted that being family meant always being available, always understanding, always willing to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. But something had changed. Maybe it was turning 68 and realizing that time was no longer infinite. Maybe it was the death of my friend Serena last year, who spent her last days regretting never having lived for herself. Maybe it was simply the accumulated exhaustion of decades of being invisible in my own life. Precisely because you are my family. This hurts me more, Dion, because I would expect you more than anyone to understand that I also have a right to my space, to my peace, to my decisions. Dion exchanged a glance with Chloe. It was quick, barely a second, but I saw it. It was that look couples share when they think they're dealing with someone difficult, when they need to stick together in the face of what they perceive as a shared problem. And in that moment, I was the problem. Dion let out a long sigh, the kind he used when he felt a conversation was taking too long to get nowhere. He ran both hands over his face, a gesture of barely contained frustration, and then looked at me with that expression he had perfected over the years, that of the patient son dealing with a complicated mother. Fine, Mom. I get that you're upset because we didn't give you more notice. You're right about that. But we're already here. The bags are inside. Chloe's already unpacked a few things in the guest room. What do you want us to do now? Go look for a hotel at 6 p.m. on a Thursday when I have meetings starting at 7 a.m. tomorrow. There was the guilt presented not as a direct emotion, but as a series of practical inconveniences I would be causing if I insisted on holding my ground. As if the fact that they had already started settling in without my permission now obligated me to accept the situation. As if their lack of planning automatically became my problem to solve. I looked down the hall toward the bedrooms. The guest room door was slightly ajar, and from where I stood, I could see a corner of the bed with what looked like clothes already spread out on it. Chloe had said she had unpacked a few things. She wasn't asking permission to stay. She was claiming territory. I walked toward that room. I heard Dion's footsteps behind me, and then Chloe's voice saying something low to him that I couldn't quite make out. I pushed the door completely open, and what I saw confirmed what I already suspected. Not only were there clothes on the bed, but toiletries were lined up on the dresser. Chloe's travel case was opened by the mirror. 2 pairs of shoes were neatly arranged by the wall. A laptop was plugged in next to the nightstand. This wasn't the preparation of someone planning to stay for a few days. This was the installation of someone planning to settle in for weeks. I turned to face Dion, who had stopped in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, watching me cautiously. "A week, you said?" He nodded, though his eyes avoided mine for a second before looking back. 2 at the most. "Mom, I told you. And all of this setup is for 2 weeks. The laptop, the bath products, enough clothes for a month." Dion shrugged, that casual gesture he used when he wanted to minimize something he knew was important. "Chloe needs to work from here, and obviously we brought what we needed to be comfortable. We weren't going to live out of a suitcase for 2 weeks. Comfortable, the word resonated in my head. They needed to be comfortable in my house, in my space, using my resources. And apparently, I just needed to be understanding. I left the room and returned to the living room where Chloe was now sitting in my favorite armchair, the one by the window, the one I had bought 3 years ago after saving up for months. She had her phone in her hand, scrolling with the casual concentration of someone who had no immediate worries. When she saw me enter, she looked up and offered me another one of those small smiles. "Ava, we really will be as little trouble as possible. You won't even notice we're here. I work remotely, so I'll be in the room most of the day. Dion leaves early and comes back late. We can buy our own food if you want, or cook for the 3 of us, however you prefer. However I prefer." As if all these options she was presenting were genuine, as if she were really giving me decision-making power, and not simply offering variations of a situation I had never accepted in the first place. I walked up to the armchair where she was sitting. I didn't say anything immediately. I just stood there looking at her, waiting to see if she understood what I was communicating without words. She blinked, the smile slowly beginning to fade. And after a few seconds, she stood up from the armchair with an awkward movement. I'm sorry. Did you want to sit here? I didn't want to sit there. I wanted her to understand that every inch of this condo was mine. That armchair wasn't an available seat for whoever needed it. But the place where I spent my afternoons reading, where I sat with my coffee every morning, where I had cried after Serena's funeral, where I had made the decision to finally leave that exhausting job at the coffee shop and take my retirement. Dion walked into the living room at that moment, and the tension must have been visible because he stopped halfway, looking between Chloe and me, as if he were trying to gauge how serious the situation was. Mom, can we talk for a minute? Just you and me? I nodded. Maybe a private conversation with my son would achieve what this group confrontation wasn't. Maybe if I spoke directly without Chloe acting as backup for his position, he might actually hear what I was trying to say. We went to the kitchen. Dion leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, and looked at me with an expression that tried to be serious, but primarily conveyed impatience. All right, Mom. Talk. What is really bothering you? Because I feel like there's something more than just the fact that we didn't call you beforehand. There was something more. Of course, there was something more. But how could I explain to my son that what bothered me was the accumulation of years of feeling invisible? How could I tell him that this incident with the suitcases was just the most recent manifestation of a pattern that had been repeating itself for decades? You bother me, Dion. It bothers me that you grew up thinking my life is a resource available when you need me, but not a priority when it comes to basic consideration. He frowned, genuinely confused, as if my words made no sense. I don't understand what you mean by that. When was the last time you visited me without needing something from me? The question came out before I could stop it. Dion opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again without making a sound. He was searching his memory, trying to find an example that would refute my accusation. And the fact that it was taking him so long to find one only confirmed my point. Mom, I come see you often. You come when you need me to watch your dog because you're going out of town. You come when Chloe is busy and you need me to hold on to some important documents. You come when you fought with her and need a place to crash for one night. You come when you have car trouble and need me to lend you money for the shop. But when was the last time you came just to ask me how I was? To spend an afternoon with me to be interested in my life beyond what I can do for you? That's not fair, Mom. His voice had risen, and I could hear the defensive tone filtering through every word. I call you on the phone. I send you texts. I asked you last week if you wanted to come out to dinner with us. You invited me to dinner because it was Chloe's birthday and you needed someone else to pay the bill. You didn't invite me because you wanted my company. In fact, you barely spoke to me all dinner. You two spent the whole time arguing about where you were going on vacation next month, while I sat there eating my salad in silence. I didn't know you felt that way. Why didn't you say anything at the time? Because I never say anything, Dion. Because I learned a long time ago that when I speak up, when I express that I feel ignored or undervalued, you all make me feel like I'm overreacting, that I'm too sensitive, that I should. Eyes, painted with light shadows that matched her designer blouse, avoided mine for a second before she looked back at me with that small, condescending smile I despised so much. Ava, please don't exaggerate. Dion and I only need to stay for a few days. They're doing renovations in our condo and the noise is unbearable. The crew starts at 6 a.m. and doesn't leave until 7 p.m. We can't sleep. We can't work. We can't live like this. We figured it wouldn't be a problem to come here. After all, you live alone and you have 2 bedrooms you don't even use. There it was. That one sentence that perfectly summed up what my family thought of me. You live alone and you have rooms you don't use. As if my life were an empty space waiting to be filled by the needs of others. As if the fact that no one was sleeping in the rooms next door automatically turned my home into a resource available to whoever needed it. As if my 68 years of existence didn't grant me the right to decide how, when, or with whom to share my space. I finally walked into the apartment and set the bags on the dining room table. The sound of the canned goods hitting the wood was louder than I'd expected. Chloe took a step back, barely perceptible, but I noticed it. Her body language had changed. She wasn't so relaxed anymore. The discomfort was starting to filter through the mask of security she always wore. I stood beside the table, not unpacking the groceries, not moving toward the kitchen as I normally would. My hands rested on the wooden surface, and I could feel my own pulse beating in my fingertips. It wasn't fear. It wasn't nerves. It was something different. It was the feeling of reaching a point of no return. Does Dion know you're here? The question was rhetorical. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it. I needed to confirm what I already suspected. That my son had allowed this, that he had been part of this plan from the start, that they had both decided together. Should have asked me before assuming I'd be available. That you should have given me the option to say yes or no. That you should have treated me with the same respect you would treat anyone else you were asking a huge favor of. It's not a huge favor, Mom. It's letting your son sleep in your guest room for a few days. It's giving up my privacy for 2 weeks. It's changing my entire routine. It's sharing my bathroom, my kitchen, my living room, every space where I breathe. It's giving up the peace that cost me so much to achieve after years of living for everyone but myself. Dion looked up at the ceiling as if seeking divine patience, and then looked back at me with that tired expression he used when he felt someone was being unnecessarily complicated. You know what, Mom? I think the real problem here is that you've been alone for too long. You've become selfish. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but it's the truth. You weren't like this before. You always had your doors open for me, for anyone. Do you remember when you let my friend Marcus live here for 3 months when his parents kicked him out? Do you remember when your sister Olivia practically lived here for a whole year? You never said anything. You never complained about your privacy or your routine back then. Of course, I remembered. I remembered Marcus, who was 19 then, with nowhere to go after his dad kicked him out for flunking out of college. I remembered cleaning up his dirty dishes every morning, doing his laundry because he never had time, cooking for 2 when I barely had enough money for 1. I remembered Olivia, my older sister, who stayed with me after her divorce and turned my small condo into her healing space, while I kept working double shifts to keep both our finances afloat. I remembered all that, and I also remembered how I felt during those periods. Invisible, exhausted, resentful, but incapable of expressing it because the people I loved needed me. And I had learned from a young age that women discomfort, and I smiled and I pretended everything was fine while I faded away a little more each day. I used to believe that being a good mother, a good sister, a good person meant constantly sacrificing myself for others. But you know what? I got tired. I got tired of being the convenient solution to everyone else's problems. I got tired of my generosity being taken for granted. I got tired of waiting for someone to ever ask me what I needed. But we did ask you what you needed, Mom. We just asked you a moment ago. We told you to tell us what you want us to do. You asked me what I wanted after you'd already made the decision for me, after you'd already settled in, after the situation was already in motion. That's not asking. That's asking for retroactive permission, expecting me to feel so guilty for refusing that I end up giving in anyway. I walked out of the kitchen. I couldn't stay in that confined space with Dion looking at me as if I were the problem, as if my resistance were a character flaw instead of a legitimate boundary. I returned to the living room where Chloe was now standing by the window, arms crossed, watching the street below. She turned around when she heard me enter, and for the first time since she arrived, I saw something different in her expression. It wasn't her usual confidence. There was caution there now, maybe even a little worry. Dawn came out of the kitchen behind me, and the silence that filled the room was so thick, I could almost feel it pressing against my skin. None of the 3 of us spoke for a moment. We just stood there forming an uncomfortable triangle of accumulated tension. Finally, Chloe was the one to break the silence. Her voice had lost that casual, confident tone. Now it sounded more careful, as if she were choosing every word with precision. Ava, if you really don't want us to stay, we can find another solution. We don't want you to feel uncomfortable in your own home. Mother who moved mountains to make things easy for him. That mother whose love was measured in silent sacrifices and ignored needs. And any deviation from that pattern wasn't personal growth on my part, but a flaw that needed to be corrected. I sat down in the armchair by the window, the one Chloe had abandoned a few minutes ago. My legs were tired. My whole body was tired. In truth, it wasn't just the physical exhaustion from going to the grocery store or standing during this endless conversation. It was a deeper exhaustion, the kind that accumulates over decades of carrying the emotional weight of other people without anyone offering to help with your own. I want you both to explain something to me, and I want an honest answer. Dion finally looked at me, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture. What do you want us to explain? If the situation were reversed, if I showed up at your condo with my bags without warning, saying I needed to stay for 2 weeks because there was a problem with my building, would you welcome me without a second thought? I saw the exchange of glances between Dion and Chloe. It was quick, barely a second, but it was enough. They both knew the answer, and they both knew the answer was different from what they expected of me. Chloe cleared her throat, searching for the right words. Well, we'd have to think about it. Our place is smaller, and we both work from home now. It would be complicated with the space. And exactly. It would be complicated. You'd have to think about it. You would consider your needs, your space, your comfort, and you'd be completely within your rights to do so. No one would judge you for protecting your privacy. No one would call you selfish for wanting to keep your routine intact. No one would expect you to sacrifice your peace of mind just because I'm family. But you're my mother, Mom. It's different. Dion had taken a step toward me, his hands outstretched as if he were trying to explain something obvious that I wasn't grasping. Why is it different? Because I'm your mother? Does that automatically mean I have less right to my own life? Does it mean my needs matter less than yours? Does it mean I can be ignored, invaded, and taken for granted because my role is to serve you? I'm not saying that. But you're demonstrating it, Dion, with every decision you make without consulting me. With every assumption that I'll be available. With every time you minimize how I feel because it doesn't align with what you need me to be. I stood up from the armchair and walked toward the suitcases that were still by the entrance. I looked at them as if I were seeing them for the first time. They were physical, concrete objects, but they represented something much larger. They represented years of unestablished boundaries. They represented decades of teaching my son that my space was his space, that my time was his time, that my life was a shared resource he could take from without asking. And I had been the one who taught him that. I had created this pattern. For years, I had prioritized being the perfect mother, the available mother, the mother who never said no without realizing that by doing so, I was slowly erasing any expectation of reciprocity or respect. Dion approached and put his hand on my shoulder again, more gently this time. Mom, please, let's not make this harder than it has to be. We just want a place to sleep for a few days. We're not trying to take anything from you, but they were taking something from me. They were taking my ability to decide over my own life. They were taking my right to say no without being punished with guilt. They were taking the possibility of existing as something more than an extension of their needs. I moved my shoulder away from his hand, not aggressively, but with enough firmness for him to understand that the gesture was unwelcome. This is my home.